Good day. In my previous video, I focused on certain comments that the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov had made over the course of an interview he gave to the Russian Россия Сегодня news organization. In this program, I'm going to focus instead on a flurry of comments that were made by President Putin in discussions with various parties and in various places, but which taken together all give a very interesting picture of developments. Before I do that, I'm going to just touch on briefly the situation militarily on the ground. Now, again, I stress, as I do many times, this is not intended to provide a detailed account of the fighting in Ukraine, something which I don't have the overall competence to do. I'm not, as I've said many times, a military person, but I think it's always helpful if one gets a sense of where we stand at any particular time. And it seems to me that the Russians, as I've discussed previously, are now clearly preparing for a big knockout blow to bring the Battle of Donbass to an end. They're resting, reorganizing, rebuilding their forces, sending in lots of new equipment apparently. And I think that over the next couple of days or weeks, we're going to see a very big offensive in Donbass indeed. And by the way, I've noticed that Lieutenant Colonel Douglas Macgregor has come to that view also, and I say that with deep humility because of course he is par excellence a military specialist to an extent that I am not and don't pretend to be. And that doesn't mean, of course, that things aren't happening in Donbass. We get constant news, more now from the Ukrainians, by the way, than from the Russians, of constant Russian hammering against Ukrainian defensive positions in Siversk, in Bakhmut, in Soledar, close to Slavyansk, and all of the rest. So the Russians continue to hammer away at all of these places. They continue to attack Ukrainian military formations. They continue to launch strikes, artillery strikes upon them and upon Ukrainian defenses as they prepare and organize for the big blow that they're intending to launch against these Ukrainian formations over the next couple of days and weeks. And as I've said previously, this is exactly the same pattern we saw in the run-up to the fall of Mariupol, and it's the same pattern that we saw in the run-up to the fall of the Severodonetsk-Lysychansk conurbation. This is the third phase in the Battle of Donbass, and it will be the final and decisive one. That's my prediction. Anyway, whilst I'm on the topic of the Battle of Donbass and returning to that perennial topic of the HIMARS, I should say that the Russian Ministry of Defense has reiterated its previous claims about the destructions of HIMARS systems. Now, I say this because the Russians previously, some time ago, claimed to have destroyed 2, and then they said that they destroyed a 3rd with a launcher. And on every occasion, there's been attempts to refute and to deny this. But the Russian Ministry of Defense has now repeated its claims, and I suspect that they've done this in response to these various attempts from various sources to deny the Russian claims about the destructions of the HIMARS. And this is what the Russian Ministry of Defense has said. From July 5th to July 20th, 4 launching ramps and 1 reloading vehicle for the US-manufactured HIMARS MRLS delivered to Ukraine were eliminated by high-precision ground and air-based armament. Among them, 2 launching ramps were destroyed near Malotar-Aranovka, 1 HIMARS and 1 reloading vehicle was destroyed near Krasnoarmeysk, as well as a 4th launching ramp at the eastern suburb of Konstantinovka Donetsk People's Republic. Now, I should say that previously the Russians had claimed that they destroyed 3 HIMARS. They're repeating that claim, but they're now saying that they've also destroyed a 4th. So that's what the Russians are claiming. I don't personally see why people are so insistent in saying that these Russian claims are untrue. It seems to me that the Russians are very careful to check their data before making claims about the specific destruction of Ukrainian equipment. They previously claimed to have destroyed 2 HIMARS systems. They've repeated that that claim was correct. They then said that they destroyed, and they provided video film of what they said was the destruction of a 3rd HIMARS system and a reloading vehicle. And again, they said that claim is correct. And they've also now said that a 4th vehicle has also been destroyed. And we've been hearing recently that the United States is going to send Ukraine for more HIMARS systems. I have to say that looks to me a little bit like replacements for the HIMARS which have been destroyed by the Russians, and that leads me to think, in fact I'm fairly sure that these Russian claims are true. Whilst on the topic of the HIMARS, I've had more correspondence, private correspondence with this correspondent of mine who's been keeping me updated about his assessments of the HIMARS systems. I should say that in a previous video I referred to this person as British. He's actually American, my mistake. I'm not in a position to disclose this person's identity, but he's been, in my opinion, consistently the most accurate correspondent on the topic of the HIMARS that I've seen up to now. And he's discussed, in particular, Ukrainian thinking in the missile strikes on the Antonovsky Bridge in Kherson. And he's also suggested that the attacks on the dam were not so much attacks on the dam itself, but the fact is that the dam also doubles as a railway bridge, and it's also been an attempt to damage the railway lines along this bridge, that's been the real target of these HIMARS missiles. And by the way, whilst I'm on the topic, let me repeat again, the HIMARS missiles that have been used both against the bridge and against the dam are not the big systems that we've been hearing about. They're clearly smaller missiles. The big 300-kilometer rockets have not yet been supplied to Ukraine. So the bridge has definitely been damaged. We don't know what damage, if any, has been done to the railway bridge and the dam. And this person, and I think this is, largely accepted, this person feels that these strikes, these HIMARS strikes on these 2 structures, the bridge and the dam, were intended to complicate logistics supply to the Russian grouping west of the Dnieper River, with the Ukrainians probably aiming to push back or destroy this Russian grouping west of the Dnieper River, given that it's increasingly looking as if once Donbass falls, the Dnieper will become the last or the next line of defense for Ukraine. And that makes complete sense. But we've also been getting reports that the latest missile strikes, the latest HIMARS strikes on the bridge in particular, have been unsuccessful. 12 missiles were launched by HIMARS system against the bridge, but all 12, the Russians claim, were shot down. And there's been reports by the Military Summary channel that what's happened is that an S-300 system that previously was protecting these facilities has now been replaced by an S-400 system. This correspondent has suggested that in fact what's actually happened is that the Russians have deployed an S-400 radar set to cover the bridge and the dam. And this is a very powerful and very sophisticated radar, more able to track HIMARS missiles, and that the data is then supplied to Panzer point defense systems, and it's those systems that are actually shooting down these HIMARS systems. And that's consistent, by the way, with the information that I'm seeing coming from the Russian side. Now, that may mean that the Russians are getting a handle on how to deal with these HIMARS systems, and they are, by the way, talking now about repairing the bridge, the road bridge, the Antonovsky road bridge, and perhaps the dam as well. So we shall see how this all plays out with the HIMARS systems. Now, note, by the way, that the Russian Ministry of Defense has said absolutely nothing about a HIMARS system that has allegedly been acquired by them. They're only talking about 4 destroyed systems, not about one that is in their possession. And I don't expect or anticipate that the Russians will ever confirm that story, even if it is true. Anyway, that's where we are on those developments. I would add, by the way, that the Ukrainians do seem to have launched another attack south from Kryvyi Rog with some of their troops towards Kherson region. It was repulsed apparently with heavy losses by Russian missile and artillery strikes. It could be that a planned offensive towards Kherson is indeed still in the works, but for the moment it hasn't happened. And by the way, there's been a rather annoying claim or point made by a British intelligence officer. He claims that the Russians have run out of steam, and that this is a good moment for Ukraine to launch a counteroffensive. Now, that suggests that the pressure to launch this counteroffensive, be it in Kherson region or somewhere else, is not homegrown from within Ukraine. It's coming from the external sponsors of Ukraine, first and foremost from the British. And if that is correct, then I would say that this is completely wrong. The British have no business telling the Ukrainians how to conduct this war. And I strongly suspect that this advice that the British are giving to the Ukrainians is wrong, and that it has more to do with internal British needs than with Ukrainian ones. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about the situation on the ground. Except, finally, one last thing, which is that one very important Russian official has, it's now clear, been touring the Donbass. He's been going from one military unit to another, handing out decorations, hearing reports, discussing future operations with commanders, and that is the Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. And the fact that Shoigu has been carrying out this very detailed and intense tour of the battlefronts is another reason, I think, why the Russians are, another indicator that the Russians are preparing a big offensive fairly soon. It seems to me entirely logical that before such an offensive is organized, that the man in overall charge visits the battlefield, consults with the field commanders, finds out what they need, and then goes back to Moscow, where, by the way, there's been another meeting of the Russian Security Council with a view to discussing with the top officials in Moscow what further steps need to be taken to prepare for this big offensive. Now, and I would add also briefly that Lavrov's comments, which I touched on in my previous video, that the Russians won't stop at Donbass, that they're going to push further west, that they might in fact be aiming to occupy the whole of Ukraine unless some kind of cast iron agreement is reached, that also points to a very big Russian offensive being in the works. Whilst I'm on the topic of Shoigu, he's on the way to Istanbul, where he's now going to sign an agreement which has been brokered by Turkey, as we should now call it apparently, and the United Nations. And this is about facilitating exports of grain from Ukrainian ports. Now, this has been a tangled and complicated story which has gone on for some time, but the long and the short of it is that the Russians have said that they are not blocking Ukrainian grain exports from Black Sea ports. They've never imposed that kind of blockade. What needs to happen is that there need to be guarantees that any Ukrainian ships passing out of those ports and returning to them are not bringing in weapons, and also that Ukraine needs to demine, at least to some extent, these ports. And the latest reports from the New York Times and also from the United Nations and the Turks and all of those suggest that the Russians have got what they wanted on both counts. I suspect what's happened is that there's been mounting pressure from the global south to resolve this issue, and that the Western powers have been forced to strong-arm the Ukrainians into making significant concessions in order to get those Ukrainian grain ships moving. As Putin has repeatedly pointed out, Ukrainian grain is not going to resolve the global food crisis. The major problem is EU and Western sanctions, which have obstructed Russian food and fertilizer exports. And it's notable and really very interesting that the latest round of EU sanctions has gone out of its way to make clear that exports of Russian agricultural products and fertilizer are not affected, are not covered by sanctions. And in my opinion, those declarations and those announcements, which also, by the way, apparently cover Russian banks involved in the agricultural export trade, those EU announcements are far more important than the rather tepid sanctions that have been imposed on Russian gold exports to the EU, which, to be straightforward about it, are neither here nor there. It looks to me as if this seventh package of sanctions isn't really another seventh sanctions package at all. It's rather a smokescreen as the EU makes significant concessions to the Russians on food and fertilizer exports. And by the way, as we discussed on a live stream yesterday with I.L. Gray, I agree with I.L. Gray's point that what's going to happen is that several Russian banks are now going to basically protect themselves from EU sanctions by simply saying that they're agricultural banks. And so this is actually quite a significant concession indeed. Anyway, that's the position on grain and food. The deal in Istanbul marks significant concessions on the part of Ukraine, but it's going to have minimal impact on the situation with food prices around the world. The EU decision to apparently relax sanctions on Russian export of food and fertilizer, by contrast, that is big news. And It's a significant concession to the Russians. It's a much bigger concession than the one that the Ukrainians have been forced to make, and it far outweighs the restrictions on imports into the EU of Russian gold, which, as I said, is neither here nor there. By the way, the point about Ukrainian export of food from their ports also does something else, which is that it diffuses some of the military tension that there has been over the last few weeks in this part of the Black Sea. The Western powers have been supplying Ukraine with anti-ship missiles, which the Russians have been destroying. We had all that business with Snakes Island. I suspect that at this particular juncture in the war, it suits both Ukraine and Russia to calm the situation in this part of the Black Sea down, and the fact that grain ships are going to be passing through Ukrainian ports, I suspect it's going to do that too. Anyway, that's grain. That's the situation where we are with food. The situation with oil is altogether, or rather energy, is altogether more interesting. And I'm going to start with a telephone call that has taken place between Vladimir Putin and no less a person than Mohammed bin Salman, who is, of course, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and it is the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia, and is likely to become the king of Saudi Arabia before very long. Now, some of you may remember, and most of you no doubt remember, that just a short while ago, President Biden visited Saudi Arabia. And, of course, he said that his visit to Saudi Arabia was not about getting the Saudis to increase oil production. And I said that it undoubtedly was. And the Saudis, in fact, made no commitments to increase oil production. And that Biden came away from the trip to Saudi Arabia empty-handed. Now, interestingly enough, just a few days after Biden is gone, what does MbS do? He has a telephone call conversation with his good friend, President Putin of Russia. And I'm going to read out the full text of the Russian readout of this call. It's the Russian readout. I haven't seen the Saudi readout, but this is what the Russians say happened. Vladimir Putin had a telephone conversation with Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud. And it then goes on to say the following. This conversation, by the way, happened on the 21st of July. Both sides praised the level of friendly relations between Russia and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia and Russia, best of friends, both the Saudis, both MbS and Putin praised how good their relations were. So Biden comes along to Saudi Arabia, but directly after he's gone, MbS is agreeing with Putin, and both are praising the friendly relations between Saudi Arabia and Russia. Anyway, to continue, they discuss topical issues of bilateral cooperation with an emphasis on the expansion of mutually beneficial trade and economic ties. And now we come to the call. The leaders examined developments on the global oil market. They focused on the importance of further coordination with OPEC+. The parties were pleased to know that the OPEC+ member countries consistently fulfill their obligations in order to maintain the necessary balance and stability in the global energy market. In other words, Saudi Arabia is going to stick with OPEC+. It's not going to increase oil production to please the Americans. It's not going to give up on its alliance, its energy alliance with Russia, that, from the Saudi point of view, is essential to maintain stability in the global oil market. And MbS clearly phoned Putin in part to reassure him that that was the case. And of course, it's not a one-way street, because we now come on to the next paragraph. Vladimir Putin and Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud also discussed the situation in Syria following the meeting of the leaders of the guarantor states of the Astana process on the settlement in Syria, held on July 19th in Tehran. So Putin reassures the Saudis no alliance between Russia and Iran directed at Saudi Arabia. We're not freezing you out. We are anxious to maintain good relations with you. And no doubt Putin comprehensively briefed the Saudis about the relations between Iran and Russia, and about the discussions that took place between himself and the Iranian leadership in Tehran. So the Saudis and the Russians understand each other. They're working together. They're preserving their energy alliance. They're not working against each other on issues like Syria and over Iran. And it finishes, the leaders agree to maintain contacts at various levels. So we can now, I think, definitively say that the Biden visit to Saudi Arabia comprehensively failed. Well, that's the situation on oil markets. What about the situation with Russian oil production? Well, we've now had a meeting between Putin and Russia's energy minister, Nikolai Shulginov. And this took place also on the 21st of July, shortly after the telephone conversation between, actually shortly before the conversation between Putin and MbS. Putin spoke to the Russian energy minister at 2:15 on the 21st of July, and he spoke to MbS on 25 minutes past 7 o'clock on the 21st of July. So first he talks to the energy minister, and then he talks to MbS. And the most interesting part about this conversation with the energy minister is, and this is now from the energy minister's report, that oil production, Russian oil production, is increasing. And the energy minister reported to Putin, oil production in the past 6 months has exceeded last year's result by 3.4%. The production of energy grew by 1.9%, which means that energy consumption has been respectively higher. Instead of Russian oil production falling because of the sanctions the West has imposed, Russian oil production is increasing. The reason it's increasing is because the Russians are consuming more energy internally, but also because they're exporting more oil and energy products to Asia. And of course, we know that Russian oil production, which is going to Asia, is being re-exported to Europe and to the United States through various middlemen. So the intention was to destroy, or at least wreck, the Russian oil industry. So far, it's failing. What about natural gas? Well, this has been a tangled topic, and there's been much discussion about the situation with Russian energy exports to Europe. And here I'm going to focus on what Putin has had to say about this. Now, he said this at a press conference he gave, I think, in Tehran. And again, this happened over the last couple of days. He said this on the 19th of July, and it was indeed it said in Tehran. And he's explained the position fairly carefully. And he says there are no grounds at all for the attempts by our partners, that's the Europeans, to shift or to try to shift the blame for the energy crisis in Europe from their own mistakes onto Russia and Gazprom. What is the situation with energy deliveries? In 2020, in the first half of 2020, gas cost 100 euros per 1,000 cubic meters in Europe. The price rose to 250 euros in the first half of 2021. Today, it is 1,700 euros per 1,000 cubic meters of gas. What is happening? I have spoken about this on numerous occasions, and I do not know if we should go into detail regarding the energy policies of European countries which underrate the importance of traditional sources of energy and have put money on non-traditional energy sources. They are big experts on non-traditional relations, and they have also decided to make a bid for non-traditional energy sources like the sun and wind. Well, that was, if I may say so, a cruel but very Putinist quip. I'm not going to say more about it. People can figure it out for themselves. Last winter was long, there was no wind, and that did it. Investment in the fixed assets of traditional energy producers has decreased because of previous political decisions. Banks do not finance them, insurance companies do not insure them, local governments do not allocate land plots for new projects, and pipeline and other forms of transportation are not developing. This is a result of many years, probably a decade of this policy. This is the root cause of price hikes rather than any actions by Russia or Gazprom. What is going on today? Until recently, we supplied gas to Europe without Turkey. Putin is very careful now to speak of Turkey, not Turkey. We supplied around 30 billion cubic meters a year to Turkey and 100 billion to Europe. 55 billion via Nord Stream 1, and if memory serves me, 33 billion was supplied via Yamal Europe, via the two strings that run through Ukraine. About 12 billion were delivered to Europe through Turkey via Turk Stream. Ukraine suddenly announced that it was going to close one of the two routes on its territory, allegedly because the gas pumping station is not under its control, but on the territory of the Lugansk People's Republic. But it found itself under the control of the Lugansk People's Republic several months before, and they closed it just recently without any grounds. Everything was functioning normally there. No one interfered. In my opinion, they closed it simply for political reasons. What happened next? Poland imposed sanctions on Yamal Europe, which supplied 33 billion cubic meters of gas. They used to take 33 to 34 cubic meters a day, billion cubic meters a day from us. They shut it down completely. But then we saw that they turned on the Yamal Europe pipeline in reverse mode, and they started taking around 32 million a day from Germany. Where is the gas from Germany coming from? It is our Russian gas. Why from Germany? Because it turned out to be cheaper for the Poles. They used to get it from us at a very high price, closer to the market price, whereas Germany gets it from us 3 to 4 times cheaper than the market price under long-term contracts. It is profitable for German companies to sell it to the Poles at a small premium. It is profitable for the Poles to buy it because it is cheaper than to buy it directly from us. But the volumes of gas in the new European market has decreased, and the total market has gone up. Who has won? All Europeans has lost. This is the second point. Yamal Europe. So first one of the routes in Europe was shut down, then Yamal Europe was shut down, now Nord Stream 1, which is one of the main routes. We pump 55 billion cubic meters a year through it. There are 5 Siemens gas compressor stations working there, and 1 is on standby. 1 compressor had to be sent out for repairs. A repaired compressor was supposed to come from Canada, from the Siemens plant in Canada, to replace it, but it ended up under sanctions in Canada. So 1 pumping station, just 1 piece of equipment was out of order because of scheduled maintenance, and it has not been returned from Canada. Now we are being told that the unit will be delivered from Canada soon, but Gazprom does not have any official documents yet. We must certainly obtain them, because this is our property. It is the property of Gazprom. Gazprom should receive not only the hardware, not only the gas pumping unit, but also the accompanying documents, because both the legal and the technical documentation. We must be able to see what Gazprom is taking, the turbine's current condition as well as its legal status, whether it is under sanctions or not, what we can do with it, or maybe they're taking it back tomorrow. But that is not all. The problem is that at the end of July, on July 26th, I think, we can ask Gazprom, another turbine should be sent for routine maintenance for repairs. And where will we get a replacement from? We do not know. 1 more turbine is actually out of order because of some crumbling of its internal liner. Siemens has confirmed this. That leaves 2 operational units which are pumping 60 million per day. So if 1 more is delivered, fine, we will have 2 in operation, but if it is not, only 1 will be left, and it will pump only 30 million cubic meters per day. You can count how much time it will take to pump the rest. How is this Gazprom's responsibility? What does Gazprom even have to do with this? They have cut off 1 route, then another, and sanctioned this gas pumping equipment. Gazprom is ready to pump as much gas as necessary, but they have shut everything down. And they have fallen into the same trap with the import of oil and petroleum products. We hear all sorts of crazy ideas about the volume of Russian oil imports or the price of Russian oil. This is going to lead to the same situation as with gas. The result? I'm surprised to hear people with university degrees saying this will be the same. Rising prices, oil prices will spiral. As for the gas, there is another route we're ready to open, which is Nord Stream 2. It is ready to be launched, but they're not launching it. There are problems here as well. I discussed them with Chancellor Scholz about 6 or maybe 8 weeks ago. I raised with him this issue. I said that Gazprom had reserved the capacity and that this capacity needed to be used and it cannot be suspended in mid-air indefinitely. The answer was that there were other issues on the agenda, more important things, so it is difficult for them to deal with this issue right now. But I had to warn them that then we would have to redirect half of the volume instead intended for Nord Stream 2 for domestic consumption and processing. I raised this issue at the request of Gazprom, and Gazprom has actually done it. Therefore, even if we launch Nord Stream 2 tomorrow, it will not pump 55 billion cubic meters, but actually half that amount. And given that we are already halfway through this year, it would be just a quarter. Such is the supply situation. But I said this at the beginning of my answer to your question, and I want to end with this. Gazprom has always fulfilled and will always fulfill all of its obligations, as long, of course, as anyone needs it. First, they themselves close everything, and then they look for someone to blame. It would be comical if it were not so sad. So what Putin is saying is this: look, you're running out of gas in Europe. It's nothing to do with us. You've done this to yourselves. You close pipelines here, you close pipelines there, you don't return turbines when we need them to be returned, and then you come back and you tell us when you're running out of gas that this problem is now exploding on your hands. And I think that this is the Russian game plan. They know that the Europeans are going to do this, so they sit by. They don't work to try to get the pipelines reopened. They let the Europeans make their own problems for them. And the Russian calculation, and I'm sure it's correct, is that the Europeans get just enough gas to keep things going, but not enough gas to replenish their underground gas reserves, so that come the winter, they're going to be in very, very severe problems. Meanwhile, Mario Draghi goes to Algeria, asks the Algerians for more gas. The Algerians tell him they're not in a position to supply more gas. Ursula von der Leyen goes to Baku to speak to Azerbaijan. The Azerbaijanians tell her the same thing. So there is no substitute for Russian gas. There is no alternative to Russian gas. Meanwhile, the Europeans have been playing all these games with gas supplies from Russia. They're playing all these games with oil supply from Russia. And all that they're doing is that they're creating an energy crisis for themselves. Now, we've seen that the Europeans have now relaxed their sanctions on Russian agricultural exports. I wonder whether sometime in the winter they're going to start to do the same with Russian energy exports. Whether, in fact, Yellen's oil price cap scheme, crazy as it is, isn't going to be a mechanism to relax the restrictions on Russian oil exports to Europe. Now, can I say, and whether some sort of new similar arrangement will be done with Russian gas. And I'm going to say this finally, whilst I'm talking on this topic, you can see how exasperated the Russians, how exasperated Putin has become with all of this. Irrespective of what the Europeans do now, even if the Europeans were to switch policies completely, were to tell the Russians, we're lifting all the sanctions, we're going to go back to the trade that we once had with you, I think it's irretrievable. The Russians have been able to retain oil production to the same level. Gazprom is doing its deals with Iran. I think that oil and gas exports from Russia are no longer going to flow west to Europe. They're going to flow east to Asia instead. The Russians have shown their ability to redirect their exports. They've shown their ability to preserve their oil industry. They're doing the same with their gas industry. They're allowing the pain dial on Europe to crank upwards. They're going to continue to do that, but they're going to let the Europeans do the damage, most of the damage to themselves. Now, Putin lastly said something else, and this is about the overall nature of what is happening in the world. And it's really quite remarkable what he said, because he's talking about a revolutionary transition in international relations. And he said this at a conference that he attended, the ASI Forum, Strong Ideas for a New Time, which took place on the 20th of July in Moscow, but perhaps we can move on and discuss his words about the global picture. And he said that truly revolutionary transformations are gaining momentum and getting stronger. These enormous changes are irreversible. National and global processes are underway to develop the fundamentals and principles of a harmonious, fairer and more community-focused and safe world order as an alternative to the existing world order or the unipolar world order in which we lived, and which, because of its nature, is definitely becoming a brake on the development of our civilization. The model of total domination by the so-called golden billion, he means the West, is unfair. Why should this golden billion, which is only part of the global population, dominate everyone else and enforce its rules of conduct that are based on the illusion of exceptionalism? It divides the world into first and second class people and is therefore essentially racist and neo-colonial. The underlying globalist and pseudo-liberal ideology is becoming increasingly more like totalitarianism and is restraining creative endeavor and free historical creation. One gets the impression that the West is simply unable to offer the world a model of the future for the future of its own. Indeed, it was no accident that the golden billion attained its goal and achieved quite a lot, but it got there not because it implemented certain concepts. It mainly got to where it is by robbing other people in Asia and Africa. That is how it was. India was robbed for an extensive period of time. This is why the elite of the golden billion are terrified of other global development centers potentially coming up with their own development alternatives. No matter how much the West and the supranational elite strive to preserve the existing order, a new era and a new stage in world history are coming. Only generally sovereign states are in a position to ensure a high growth dynamic and become a role model for others in terms of standards of living and quality of life, the protection of traditional values and high humanistic ideals and development models, where an individual is not a means but the ultimate goal. Sovereignty is about freedom of national development and thus the development of every individual. It is about the technological, cultural, intellectual and educational solvency of a state. That is what it is. No doubt, responsible, active and nationally minded and nationally oriented society is the most important component of sovereignty. I am convinced that in order to be strong, independent and competitive, we need to improve the mechanisms for people to participate in the country's life and make them more open and fairer. That includes mechanisms for direct democracy and people's involvement in addressing the critical problems facing society and the public. The way forward is to rely on people's creative potential to team up how many thousand, and then he goes on to address the meeting itself and talk about Russian concerns. So we see an outright repudiation of the globalist model. He says that the globalist model is itself the legacy of Western 19th century colonial imperialism. He says that the former colonies of the West, which make up the greater part of the global population, have nothing therefore to gain from continuing with this present outdated Western focused model, and that Russia, through its actions in places like Ukraine, is in effect fighting the cause of the global South, and that globalism needs to be replaced by a system of true independence of sovereign national states, including by extension those in the global south. That's quite a compelling narrative, quite a compelling picture that Putin is offering, and we can see that it is getting more and more takers. So we see a confident Putin. On the one hand, he talks about how energy policy is working out the way he wants it to. He's building up his relations with the Saudis. The Saudis are not turning their backs on him. The Saudi-Russian energy alliance remains intact. He's forging ahead with relations with the Iranians. He's pursuing the business of Ukrainian integration and construction, which I've discussed in previous programs. And he's moving forward with a political alternative, if you like, to the Western-centric globalist model. He's talking about a decentralized model dominated by national states. Quite a lot of work done by Putin over the course of just a few days. An important trip to Iran, discussions with Turkey, with Erdogan, and with the leadership of Iran, a very important conversation with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, an explanation of the problems, the energy problems that the West is now facing, and a clear statement of his and Russia's wider objectives in the world, of which this campaign in Ukraine, this operation in Ukraine, is only a part. Whatever one may think of Putin, one can't help but be impressed both by the mental energy, the grasp of detail, and the hard diplomatic work that this man does. Well, that's all I'm going to say about all of this today. We'll see how these events shape out over the next few weeks and months. But I think when Putin talks about revolutionary transformations going on in the world, he's saying nothing less but the truth. Well, thank you for joining me again today. Remember, you can find us on our other platforms, on Locals first and foremost, on Rumble, on our Telegram channel. You can also find us on ODYSEE as well. Also, remember, you can support us via Patreon and Subscribestar. You can go to our shop and buy the great things that you will find there. Remember also, if you've liked this video, to tick the like button and to check your subscription to this channel. Thank you for joining me again today. More from me soon.